expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.
Good day. You are listening to Ability Radio. I am one of your hosts, Amelia Headley-Lamont of the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands. And today we have a wealth of information and a full house, so we're going to get right to it today. Our special guests are Kimberly Washington, Acting Administrator of the Department of Human Services, Division of Disabilities and Rehabilitation Services. She is joined by two people on her team, Reneta, Adjodha, who works as a transition coordinator, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that involves, and also Rifkah, Deane, who is the transition program assistant. And we also are blessed today by being joined with Shammi Carr, our extraordinary advocate for the Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands out of our St. Thomas office. So good morning to you all.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
And I should probably say good day because we don't know when this will be heard by our listening audience. First of all, I'd like to be clear on what we mean by vocational rehabilitation. So, Kimberly, let me ask you that, and then some of us might chime in a little bit later. But what's your take on what that involves? What do we mean when we say vocational rehabilitation?
Okay. Well, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. So when anyone thinks vocational rehabilitation services, or it's also known as voc rehab, really think of employment and a federal service that provides people with disabilities access to more employment options, access to federal dollars that will assist with transition services from high school to post-secondary services. VR services or voc rehab services really work on behalf of individuals with disabilities, assisting them with gaining employment, maintaining a job, maybe regaining a job that was lost because the disability impacted the person so significantly that they could not continue to work in that job setting without accommodations. So when someone thinks of voc rehab, it is a service specifically for individuals with disabilities and assisting them, empowering them to get back into the workforce.
That's important. My understanding is when it first started, they only focused on persons with, I guess, physical disabilities, but that has, of course, broadened in definition. Is that correct?
Yes. So initially, back in the days of, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Judith Hyman. I may be mispronouncing her name. So back in the 70s, voc rehab really was kind of like non-existent for individuals with disabilities. So when the civil rights for Black Americans was, in its prime, people with disabilities really saw how Black Americans were fighting for their civil liberties, for their civil rights. And that kind of spurred up the initiative for individuals with disabilities to then follow suit and capture the American attention for civil rights for people with disabilities that were being overlooked. So that really, with the Rehab Act of 1973, along with the Section 504, those acts really kind of opened up opportunities for better workforce connections, better accessibility in state and public spaces, and then, of course, telecommunications. So prior to the Rehab Act of 1973 and subsequently the signing of a Section 504, there weren't really any services or, I would say, pieces of legislation that advocated on behalf of people with disabilities.
Okay, so, bottom line is your office helps persons with disabilities, and we could say broad range of disabilities. We're not just limited to, what's visible. You help people get work and keep work and
meaningful.
Go ahead. No, this is great stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a special term called competitive integrated employment.
Mm-hmm.
That's the term that comes from top down when we talk about employment, because we're not focusing on, there's a concern with people with disabilities can only work in this sector or only do this type of job. So competitive integrated employment is broad And the word competitive is what we strive for, because that provides that meaningful work that we all kind of desire to have, disability or not.
Now, one advantage I know that we have in the territory is that our minimum wage law is significantly more. I mean, it's not huge, but it is more than the national minimum wage. It's my understanding our minimum wage law is what, $10.50 an hour, and the national minimum wage is $7 and change per hour. So am I correct in assuming that once an individual gets a job, that they will be paid at a minimum, the minimum wage law, as the minimum wage law applies here? Would that be accurate?
Yes, that would be accurate. There is a sub minimum wage law under the federal government where businesses, entities cannot pay sub minimum wage. There is, of course, a gray area in everything, but yes, you're absolutely correct.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think the sub minimum is a whole other conversation, but I know exactly what you
It is.
mean. Shammi, let me bring you on board, and can you just tell us what is the Disability Rights Center doing with regard to vocational rehab work?
Wonderful and good day, everyone, again, and a pleasure to be here with friends and colleagues to talk about a very important issue because I will say right now, we are in a labor shortage. And this is where we are very fortunate that, places like vocational rehab, which is a public workforce system, has a pool of talent. And so that's what we do at DRCVI is not only, and I can explain the CAP program in a few minutes, but not only do we help people navigate the voc rehab system, making sure they know what they provide, how to work with them, what are their rights. But we also help because I have a background in, as Kim called, competitive integrated employment, talking about workforce readiness and also reasonable accommodations. So these are the things what I call employment advocacy, a little bit more specific, what we can provide at Disability Rights Center. But because I have a background in workforce development, I really do enjoy working not only with voc rehab, but working with high school students, whether they be on a 504 plan, whether they have an IEP, to them help them transition into the world of work, as Kim said she's going to be talking about in a few minutes.
Okay, now you were throwing out some terms that maybe the public might not be familiar with.
Sure.
IEP, what does that mean?
Sure. So an IEP is an individual education plan. An IEP is something that is a document that anybody who qualifies under special education will typically have or should have because it's a document that's in writing. A Section 504, and Kim did mention about the Rehabilitation Act with Section 504. Those are students who don't necessarily need significant modifications to a program, but maybe just some accommodations and slight modifications. Then they would fall under what's called the 504 plan.
Mhm.
Those are both educational documents that help a student to be able to go through their school career.
Mhm.
One thing that will come up is talking about IPE, and that's an individual plan of employment. And that's what Voc Rehab uses as their document to help their clients navigate their system.
So I'm curious as to, how many people, and not precise numbers, but can you give us some idea, Kimberly, as to how many people are seeking your services and have successful outcomes?
Yes, so we receive referrals every day. Services are really provided on an individual basis. VR considers quote unquote successful employment or closure of a case to be when a person gains employment after a certain period of time and follow up. So that is a constant, review that the program has. At the end of fiscal year 24, we had pretty good number of successful closures. Referral information can always be found at Department of Labor. We do have our information, our referral information on the VIDHS website. So referrals happen pretty much every day,
Mhm.
several times a day. Once we receive the referral, then we begin the VR process on eligibility, etc. So so we consider success when a person gains competitive integrated employment and then a successful follow-up for about 4 quarters or 90 days with additional 12 months. And then once we kind of review if the person is happy in their employment and if the employer is satisfied and there's an amicable satisfaction between the employer and the employee, then we close the case successfully.
Okay, what kind of jobs are we talking about?
A variety of jobs. Again, this is everything that's very individual. So one person may come in and say, you know what, I enjoy working with people. I always like being around people, helping people. So we may administer a career assessment just to kind of get a more specific view of strengths and some challenges and what skills and abilities. And then from there, we may say, hey, your assessment shows a lot of these skills that you obviously know about yourself, as far as being a helper or being someone that likes to be in social settings. And so with that, we look into the community for employers that we already have relationships with, or we say, you know what, these employers are hiring. We reached out to them and they're expecting your phone call. So it could be from, of course, the Virgin Islands. We have a high tourism rate. So it could be working in the retail industry, or it could be working in the culinary industry, or in the mechanical industry, or in aviation. So there really isn't a set job. We look in our community with our employers to see how we can make the best fit.
Excellent. Now let's talk about transition. I know we have two participants, Reneta, Adjodha, and Rifkah Deane. Reneta, tell me about your work as a transition coordinator.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So I am Reneta Adjodha. I'm the transition coordinator for the territory. And we talked about pre-eds earlier, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So when we say pre-eds stands for Pre-Employment Transition Services. And that includes a specific set of activities under the Section 113 of the Rehab Act, which is charged to 15% minimum services of the VR fund. So pre-ed services are require set of activities in coordination with education, and there are services provided to all students who meet the definition of a student with a disability who may need such services and are either eligible for VR services or potentially eligible.
Now, what ages are we talking about?
Ages 14 to 21.
Okay.
Now, the student doesn't necessarily have to be a VR client, but as long as they have an IEP, which Shammi explained earlier, or a 5-4 plan, they are eligible for transition services.
And how do they come to you? How do you know
They
that
come
these...
to us for referrals from
Uh-huh.
the schools,
Okay.
generally from the schools.
Okay.
We attend IEP meetings. We try to attend all the IEP meetings of the students, and then we explain our program, and then referrals come through there.
That's good. That's excellent.
So I talked about the 5 required services.
Mm-hmm.
So what we provide for transition services for our students, we provide job exploration counseling, where the students will explore their careers, enhance opportunities for meaningful interaction, engagement. We also provide work-based learning experiences. It may include in-school or after-school opportunities. Generally, we do a summer employment program for our students where we put them in an area of interest to them, and then we work with the employers, and then we pay them for the summer employment.
Okay.
But we're hoping to expand that for in-school. Generally, the students with an IEP or 504 plan, they participate in on-the-job training in the 12th grade, I believe, where the school puts them on a site. And so we're hoping to collaborate with the high schools this year and actually give the students a little stipend
Okay.
for the work-based learning experience.
Have you done certain locations that you were able to disclose over the summers where you've had children placed or young people placed in jobs?
Oh, yeah. We've had them placed in different government offices. The legislature is usually very good at placing some of our students. We've had them placed in mechanic shops, in the hospital, in doctor's offices, wherever the student shows an interest, because the goal is to expose them to different opportunities. So by the time they graduate high school, they have a pretty clear plan of what they want to do.
Right.
We help guide them with that. And then so when they graduate, they know what they're going to do. They know where they're going to do it. They know how they're going to accomplish those goals. And again, if they decide to become a VR client, the end goal is competitive integrated employment.
That's
Yeah, so we
fantastic.
place them all over the island. We
Mhm.
place them at the Children's Museum. We normally get a good response from employers
Mhm.
um, and to accept our students. Yes, and Miss Dean can tell you some of the places in St. Croix that the students work.
Okay. Well, this is great. Okay. Rifkah, tell us where you have had a lot of success.
Hi, good morning. So we've had students for the work-based summer. We've had students work for Human Services, Department of Agriculture. We usually use agriculture every year.
Mhm.
They're always happy to get some of our students, and the students actually enjoy working there. Some work, fixing the track, the vehicles, and as mechanics, and then some will work in the nursery there at agriculture. We've had students work at the animal shelter, sports park and rec, construction companies. Yeah, so those are some of them. Oh, and daycares. The students who are interested in early childhood education or working at daycare, they get, to do that. They get the experience working there. And we encourage our students to do that, do the work-based summer program, because then it gives them an idea, like, in terms of the demands for the job and, what it involves. That way, they get to work there and see if that's what they really want to do. Because we always encourage our students to have a backup plan just in case, the first one doesn't work out.
That's sound advice. Very sound advice. I'm really impressed that the variety that you've mentioned, as far as career choices, and that students are not relegated to one set line of work. So I think this is a very nice trend coming out of your department from what I've seen in previous years. So you to be commended for the work that you're doing at the present time. Really, really well done.
Thank you.
What made, and I'm directing this to everyone, what made you interested in this line of work? Because it is very socially based. You have to like working with people. Kimberly, I'll start with you. What made you interested in this line of work?
To be perfectly 100% honest and transparent, when I was maybe like 8, 9, I lived out in California, a town called Pixley,
Mm-hmm.
and my parents were hog farmers. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how far we lived out in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And they could not transport me to my school, which was about 30 minutes away.
Mm-hmm.
Long story short, I had a little friend on the bus who had a skin disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And so I noticed how students would treat her.
Mm-hmm.
And it just internally just made me feel some type of way.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was kind of really my first friend. I would say that was the initiation of me becoming an advocate.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was in high school, I had an opportunity to meet one of my dear friends, still my friend. Her name's Rebecca, in a town called Tulare. And she has cerebral palsy.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went to the restroom, and she had actually asked me to assist her
Mm-hmm.
in the restroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought at that time how impo- in a way it made me feel like I was helping,
Mm-hmm.
but then also I wanted to kind of protect her privacy.
You're right.
So I think those two experiences just kind of clicked the advocate in me.
Mm-hmm.
And I really stuck with being an advocate. So that's how I, was introduced to the advocacy world and then subsequently into VR.
Right. What kind of education do you need to do the kind of work that you do?
That is a great question, because vocational rehab is considered, we're losing a lot of counselors and team members that really make up the body of vocational rehab, because this is a field where a person does have to have a master's degree, and there is a certification called the Certified Rehabilitation Counselor that you can take once you graduate, or sometimes part of your like graduation packet. But yeah, I encourage anyone who enjoys working with people, in particular being an advocate for people with disabilities, and just wanting to see equity in all spaces, that check out VR. Unfortunately, there is not a program in the Virgin Islands, but there are some really great programs stateside. And you can, of course, if you want more information, you can just type in or Google vocational rehabilitation. Shammi, give me some leads on this. You can maybe Google vocational rehab services employment, or you can, go to, I would say, a lot of big agencies or VR agencies have their own personal website. We are VIDHS. We are working on a VR website, but if you just Google vocational rehabilitation services employment, then you should come up with some good information.
Okay, good. Shammi, what brought you into the fold?
Well, it's interesting to be totally transparent like Kim. My mother was a very big advocate for people who were elderly. And so she was a director, she started her own department, and she had the most grants. So I felt like I was humbly mentored by my mother to be a systems advocate. And so when I was little, it was such an empowering thing to see a single woman leading such a big charge. And I guess I just had in me to be an advocate as well. I got in the field of disability kind of a little bit by default, but I've made the very best of 25 years, and it has been excellent because of not only who we can help, because you have to be a people's person, but also how much I have learned, how much I have gained, and how much I've made friends. So it's a very reciprocating situation. And I will say that my daughter is also an advocate, so it seems to be running in the family.
Okay. Reneta, how about you?
Honestly, well, I didn't set out in that field. I studied psychology. I've always been interested in human behavior. And when I got a job at Human Services and I got introduced to the VR program, I became an advocate because I realized, especially in the territory, the lack of opportunities for students with disabilities. And a lot of times when they graduate, they end up just sitting home.
Oh, yeah.
So part of our job as a transition is to just help them have a plan when they graduate out of high school. I want our students to be exposed to different opportunities. I want them to be motivated. I want them to want a career rather than a job. And so, yeah, that's what we're working for, and that's what we're fighting for with our students here.
Excellent. Rifkah, you're the last person to ask.
Hi, yeah. So just like Mr. Judah, I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology last year at UVI. But while I was doing so before you graduate with that degree, you have to do a senior seminar project. It was like a research project. And I did mine on students and mental health disorders and the effect that COVID had on those students. So, doing that. So after I graduated, so then I graduated and then I saw that, this job position. I'm like, when I started reading the description, I'm like, this is what I want to do. It related to what I did in my senior seminar project, which is like, students with, because a disability, mental health disorders is considered disability as well.
That's right.
So, I wanted to help students, overcome those challenges and, help them become their best selves. So, I'm like, that's a good job. That way I can, work with students, that need that kind of help.
Excellent. Now, we don't want to let our time slip away from us without the audience here knowing where you are and how you can be reached. So I'll defer to whoever's best suited to answer that question. Kimberly, I'll defer to you.
Yeah. So here in St. Thomas, we are at the Nude Hansen building, the old hospital. We're on the side of the building, and you'll see our banner that says Division of Disabilities and Rehab Services. However, if you do venture into the main part of the building, you can always ask the clerks who will guide you back down to our office. So we're at 1303 Nude Hansen, and we're in Suite 1. And in St. Croix, we're at the Estate Carlton location, and I don't have exact address in my mind, so I'm going to defer to Mrs. Deane to provide that address.
Yes, so it's number 2, Estate Carlton, Suite 4, It's the colorful building after you pass Kmart West. It'll be
Yep.
on your right if you're going west.
And telephone
Um,
numbers?
Yes. So my number is 340-473-9494, and that's for St. Croix.
And St. Thomas?
Yes, it is. General number is 774-0930. And then you can ask for the vocational rehabilitation unit, and they'll transfer you here.
Okay. Well, today you've been listening to representatives from the Division of Disabilities and Rehabilitation Services and our colleague in St. Thomas, Shammi Carr of the Disability Rights Center. Ladies, thank you so much. You've been listening to Ability Radio. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
The views expressed on this program are not necessarily those of WTJX, its board, staff, or underwriters.